We know how exhilarating and daunting it can be to put pen to paper when writing your first songs. The blank page stares back at you and doubts can creep in. Where do you even begin? In this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 most essential songwriting tips for beginners that will banish those struggles and set you on the path to success. Tip number 3 is especially important, and if you never wanted to take a songwriting class or even watch another songwriting video ever again, then that tip is especially important. So stay tuned and let's dive in and turn struggles into great songs. Tip number 1, write small moments, not big themes. So it's pretty common for beginner songwriters to set out wanting to write about huge themes. I want to write about homelessness or climate change or heartbreak or love. The problem with approaching songwriting like this is that it's just too big. It puts too much pressure on the song. And what ends up generally happening is people will end up cramming too much stuff into the song and the song loses focus. Or we end up writing something that we're trying to make universal around that theme, but actually ends up just being generic or bland. In the attempt to write something universal, we end up writing something that lacks specificity and therefore lacks relatability. It's really common to get stuck if this is how you're approaching your songwriting. I loved this interview with John Mayer, where he's talking essentially about exactly the same idea. He talks about the idea that when he's trying to fit the universe into a glass of water, he just can't, he just gets stuck. So he tries not to approach his songwriting from this, what he calls glacial perspective, where he's trying to write these huge ideas. Instead of trying to fit the universe into a glass of water, the way that he talks about writing songs is he tries to write the glass of water itself. And one of the beautiful things he says there is that when you just actually focus on the small thing, what you end up discovering is that the universe is in there anyway. What he's talking about there is that when we actually focus on small moments from our own lives, when we hone in on the details of our own experience and perspectives and start to interrogate our own emotional reactions to those things, what we find is that there are universal themes living inside those moments that are ultimately going to be so much more relatable and therefore so much more universal to other people because we've approached it from our own perspective. To put it another way, and here I'm paraphrasing Paul Simon in his interview in the book Songwriters on Songwriting, where Paul Simon says that theme emerges out of the details of our own lives. So let's talk about some practical exercises that you can do to start honing in on these details and finding the moments in your days where stories and songs can come from. One of my favorite exercises is an exercise called Homework for Life, which I learned from storyteller Matthew Dix, who's written one of the best books on storytelling I've ever read, which is called Storyworthy. There's a link in the show notes if you want to check that out. Homework for Life takes 3 minutes a day, and essentially what you'll do is create a spreadsheet. You can use Google Sheets for this or any other spreadsheet. In one column, you'll just put the day's date. And in the other column, you're going to spend 3 to 5 minutes noting one thing from your day that made that day different to all other days. It might be something that you learned, something that made you think, or something that you had an emotional reaction to, even though you don't know why. I'm going to give you an example from my Homework for Life. Morning croissant mission, refusing to stand in a queue at Cafe Loon, instead traveling 35 minutes on a tram and waiting for a table for 20 minutes at Wildlife Cafe. Still felt like a better use of time. It's a control thing. So that little moment is about refusing to wait in a queue and the silliness of preferring to travel further, taking longer, only to wait in another queue at a different cafe for the same bloody croissant. And it's not that that is going to become a song, but here is the thing about Homework for Life. It is compounding. When we do this exercise every single day, we start to notice themes emerge. We start to find emotional truth in these little moments, and those little emotional truths become something universal. So what I found when I wrote that down and then scanned through some of my other entries, I found another entry in my Homework for Life, which was all about how I hate to just sit in traffic and how I would always prefer to add 10 minutes to a trip if that means that I can drive above 50 kilometers an hour. And I realized that there is a connection between these two things. And the connection is all about control, that when we are actually able to move, it gives us the illusion of being in control instead of waiting and standing still. Now, that is a song idea. It's not that I'm going to use lyrics describing waiting in line for a croissant, but certainly the traffic thing is something that is super relatable, and there are details in there that I can definitely use, and you can see how the theme has emerged out of paying attention to those little details in a day. The other absolutely brilliant exercise for this kind of thing is sense writing. Now, I've talked a lot about sense writing in a couple of other videos, and I've also included a link in the show notes to a free download to an ebook called The 5 Best Songwriting Exercises for Writing Great Lyrics, and sense writing is number 1. In that chapter, I give examples, instructions, and demonstrations of how to turn it into lyrics, so make sure to download that free ebook. To summarize, sense writing is 10 minutes of sense-based free writing. We take a random input, a random word. Usually it's an image, because that image will put other images immediately into our mind. We use that image to associate to a memory, moment, situation, experience, or event, and we put ourselves in that moment, and for 10 minutes use our senses to describe all the things that we see, feel, taste, touch, hear, smell, the sensations inside the body, the feeling on our skin, the descriptions of objects and people moving in space. And we use those senses to paint the picture in as much detail as we can. One of the great things about sense writing is that once you have actually practiced sense writing for enough time, is that you can actually take an abstract concept or a theme like loneliness or celebration, and because we've practiced associating the word to a specific experience, you can still approach it through the lens of that glass of water. You can still Trojan horse a theme inside the specifics and details of your life. So here's an example from my own sense writing that started with the word power. So immediately, instead of writing in the abstract about power, I thought of a specific moment where I felt power. I let the abstract associate to an emotion, and I found a memory where I was feeling that emotion. And it turns out that that memory was actually from being a child on a beach, experiencing the power of the waves and the ocean. But you can see how I'm Trojan horsing the theme of power inside the details of sand and waves and water and sun. Tip number 3, as songwriters, we deal in truth, not fact. The struggle I see with a lot of beginners that creates a lot of blockage at the beginning is feeling like if it didn't happen to them, they're not allowed to write about it, or they can't feel truthful or authentic unless they're drawing on autobiographical fact. But it's super important to realize that there is a difference between truth and fact. We are songwriters, we are writers, we deal in truth, not fact. We're not journalists. We don't need to adhere to the same standards of fact. What we do need to adhere to is the standards of truth. But as writers and songwriters and creative souls and spirits, one of the most important things you need to embrace sooner than later is the idea that sometimes the facts can get in the way of the truth. And the flip side of that is that we are allowed to bend the facts in order to get at a core truth. And if you have ever cried in a movie, you know that to be true. If you have had a pet that has died, you can write the truth of grief and loss. But if you were to actually mention the details of your cat dying in the lyrics of your song, that autobiographical fact might actually serve to diminish the core emotional truth that could genuinely be very important and very healing and very connecting to an audience. Sharing the core emotional truth of an experience like that might genuinely serve to help and comfort other people who have experienced some kind of grief or loss. But understanding how and when to exclude the autobiographical facts in order to communicate the core emotional truth is a very important part of the songwriting process. So how do we balance this idea that we need to look at our daily experience to find the emotional material to write great songs about, but then sometimes we need to exclude the details of our life in order to properly communicate that core emotional truth? It's a delicate balance and there's no easy answers. But one thing I would say is we can exclude the details that might serve to diminish the power and impact of an emotional truth, but we can use those exercises to incorporate the details that are going to make that emotion and experience feel real and authentic and alive. So if I use all my senses to describe the day that my pet died, I can draw on how that experience felt in my body. How did it actually make my heart, my lungs, my muscles, my fingers, my skin feel? How did my perceptions of the world that day change? How did the light alter? I can describe the experience of being inside a day that feels like no other day, where everyone else is just going about their day. I can use the details of a day as normal outside to create a really powerful emotional contrast to what I'm feeling inside. And all of those details are going to be extremely relatable to other people who've experienced any kind of grief or loss. Another implication of this idea is that you can write from the perspective of a character or a persona, and sometimes that character is going to bring out a core truth that we might not be able to bring out if we were just sticking to our autobiographical persona. Some of the most famous songwriters in the world do this as a matter of practice. Bruce Springsteen, Tom Waits, Jason Isbell, even Billie Eilish has talked about how the song Bury a Friend was written from the perspective of a monster under a bed. So don't be limited to the autobiographical facts. It's possible to communicate an important emotional truth without sticking to the facts. And that old expression of write what you know doesn't mean write the facts that you know, it means write the emotions that you know. Tip number 3. If you did this tip studiously, you would never need to take a songwriting class, and you would probably learn everything you ever need to know about songwriting if you did this one thing. Study your heroes. If you did nothing but learned how to play your favorite 50 songs by heart, you will have started down the path to success. However, just learning the songs is not quite enough. In order to become a great songwriter, this process needs to be active. We need to be picking apart chord progressions. What is the combination of chords and what is their relationship to the key center? What chords is the songwriter using in this section and then in that section? How are they using those chords? Are there chords that they are avoiding? For example, if I were to learn how to play the song Someone Like You by Adele, one of the things that I might notice if I were paying attention, I might notice that one of the strategies that Adele uses to make that chorus absolutely explode is that she avoids the tonic chord in the pre-chorus. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because the pre-chorus's job is to build tension that is released by the chorus. And if I paid attention to the chords in that song, I would see that that is one of the most important ways that we can do that. We can build tension by avoiding the tonic chord. Now, the tonic chord, all that means is if I'm in the key of G, it's the chord G. So she's avoiding the chord G in the pre-chorus and then using that chord as the first chord of the chorus. And that is one of the reasons why that chorus feels like it explodes into our hearts. I might also notice if I learned how to sing it and feel the relationship of the first melody note to all the melody notes that have come before it, that the first melody note of that chorus is the highest note we've heard so far. She hits a higher note later on in the chorus, but in order to build up to that first chorus, she never sings a note in the verses that's higher than that first note of the chorus. And that is another very important thing that we can learn that we might not notice unless we sing it ourselves. There are so many other things we could talk about from that one song, but the thing is we can't just learn to play the songs and then repeat them. We need to take them apart to understand how they are put together. It's like a car mechanic will take apart an engine in order to put it back together again, and what that means is that you can now build engines, not just drive cars. But I hear you say there are plenty of cover bands and artists who don't write particularly good songs. Well, that is where the active bit comes in. It's not enough just to play something over and over. For example, I have been brushing my teeth for the last 40 years, but I don't think I've gotten any better at it in the last 35 years. The mere fact that I do it twice every day does not guarantee that I'm learning anything new or improving. It's all about the active process of taking something apart and understanding the components that go into it. One of the ways as songwriters that we can actively seek to put something back together is to actually use the things that we notice in one song to write our own song. And it is not only okay, but actually something we should actively seek to do to imitate the songs and songwriting of the songwriters that we love. We want to write the sorts of things that we want to listen to. However, there's an important thing that must happen in the journey of any songwriter, and that is that we need to graduate from mere imitation into emulation. What is the difference between imitation and emulation? The difference is when we are emulating something, we're not merely seeking to look like our heroes, we are seeking to see like our heroes. We want to understand the thinking behind something, not just the thing itself. When we attempt to emulate the thinking behind something, that's when our own artistic voice starts to emerge. That's when we start to cross-pollinate ideas from different songs, and in recombining ideas, that's when our own artistic voice emerges, supported by the aesthetics that we've developed through practicing playing the songs that we love. If you're interested in a really specific demonstration of how you can take a chord progression from a song you love and actually apply different kinds of thinking to it to turn it into something that is truly your own, please check out this video. I'm also always keen to hear from you. If there are other tips that you've heard or read or learned that have really helped you in your songwriting, please let us and everyone else know in the comments. And don't forget to grab your free copy of the Writing Better Lyrics ebook in the link below. Happy writing, guys. See you soon.